The stars were calm, scattered across the dark space like tiny sparks. Dozens of alien refugee ships drifted quietly, their engines humming softly. Inside those ships were families, mothers holding children close, elders whispering prayers, and tired fathers keeping watch. They had been running for weeks, escaping the war that had destroyed their homes. Lyra, a young alien girl with silver eyes, sat near a small window. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, staring at the endless black. Her father had promised her they were safe now. She wanted to believe him. Then, without warning, the sky tore open. Bright, sharp streaks of light slashed through the darkness, ships dropping out of hyperspace. At first, Lyra thought maybe it was help, but her father's face turned pale, his hand tightening on her shoulder. The ships were not friendly. They were raiders. Their hulls were jagged, painted with blood-red symbols. Their weapons were already charged, pointing straight at the defenseless convoy. Alarms blared inside every refugee ship. Voices shouted through the comms, "Hostiles detected! All ships scatter!" But they had no weapons strong enough to fight back, and their engines were too slow to escape. The raiders surrounded them easily, like wolves cornering sheep. On Lyra's ship, people rushed to hide. Mothers grabbed their children, shoving them into storage compartments. Fathers locked doors and blocked hallways with whatever they could find. But everyone knew. Raiders were merciless. They would take anything valuable and anyone they wanted. The first boarding began. Metal claws extended from the raider ships, latching onto the refugee hulls. Sparks flew as cutting torches sliced open airlocks. The sound of boots echoed in the corridors as armed raiders stormed in, shouting in a language filled with cruelty. Lyra's mother pulled her close, her heart pounding against the girl's cheek. Lyra saw her father step forward, trying to protect them. A raider hit him hard across the face with the butt of a rifle, knocking him to the floor. Before she could scream, two raiders dragged him away toward the airlock. Her mother's trembling hands covered Lyra's mouth to keep her quiet. Tears rolled down her face as she watched her father disappear. The air inside the ship was heavy with fear. People were being pulled from their hiding spots, shoved into lines, their voices filled with helpless cries. The sound of weapons charging echoed from the raider ships outside. Just when it seemed there was no hope, Lyra felt a strange vibration under her feet. At first it was faint, like a distant drumbeat. Then it grew stronger, rattling the walls. The refugees looked at each other in confusion. The raiders paused too, some tilting their heads as if trying to hear it clearly. Lyra's eyes widened as a small blinking light appeared on the radar screen. More signals followed, multiple transponders broadcasting on open channels. The signal codes were unfamiliar to the refugees, but burned fear into the raiders' faces. It was Earth Fleet. The raider leader barked orders, telling his crew to hurry, but it was too late. From the far side of the convoy, space shimmered as massive human warships tore through hyperspace gates. The lead ship, its steel hull shining under the faint starlight, carried Earth's insignia on its side, a blue and white crest that glowed like a warning. The humans wasted no time. The EFS Dauntless broadcast a single message in a deep, steady voice. "This is Commander Hayes of the Earth Fleet. You have one chance to surrender." The silence that followed was heavy. The raiders laughed over the comms, mocking the humans, believing they wouldn't dare to attack so close to alien territory. But the laughter stopped when the humans opened fire. Railgun slugs ripped through the raider flagship's armor, tearing it apart in seconds. The sound of the impact didn't carry in space, but the flashes of destruction lit up the darkness like thunderclaps. Shards of metal spun into the void, reflecting the light of burning engines. Inside the refugee ships, faces turned toward the windows in disbelief. The humans didn't hesitate, didn't wait for orders from councils or alliances. They moved with deadly precision, their ships cutting through the enemy formation like knives through cloth. Lyra pressed her face against the glass, watching as the largest raider ship broke apart under the human attack. Her chest felt tight, a mix of fear and something else, hope. Her mother's grip loosened slightly, and for the first time since the attack began, she whispered, "Maybe we'll live." The raiders began to panic, their once tight formation breaking apart as they tried to retreat. But the humans were relentless. Smaller human frigates darted between the larger warships, chasing down raiders like predators. Boarding pods shot out from the Dauntless, carrying heavily armed human marines toward the enemy vessels. Through the chaos, Lyra caught a glimpse of the man leading them. Commander Hayes stood on the bridge of his ship, his eyes cold, his jaw set. He looked at the battle not with rage, but with determination. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much and refused to let it happen again. No survivors among the Raider leadership, he ordered. The humans fought like they had trained for this very moment. They didn't just repel the attack, they turned it into a hunt. Every time a Raider tried to run, a human ship was there to cut them off. Every time they tried to hide, human sensors found them. For Lyra, it felt unreal. Just minutes ago, she thought she would die or be taken like her father. Now she watched as the predators who had terrorized her people were being torn apart without mercy. The sky, once calm and silent, was now alive with streaks of light, burning wreckage, and the glow of weapons fire. It was terrifying, but beautiful in its own way. A storm that came not to destroy the weak, but to shield them. As the battle raged, the young girl couldn't look away. She didn't understand humans, not really. But she knew one thing. They had come for her people when no one else had. And in that moment, under the red glow of destruction, Lyra believed that maybe, just maybe, they could be saved. The EFS Dauntless moved to the front of the human fleet, its massive hull casting a shadow over the refugee ships. On the bridge, Commander Hayes stood tall, his hands gripping the railing as he studied the Raider formation. The warning message had been sent, but the Raiders were still moving, still boarding, still stealing. His jaw tightened. He gave them a few seconds, just enough for a choice: surrender or be destroyed. The seconds passed. The Raider leader's voice crackled over the comms, filled with mockery and arrogance. "Earth Fleet, turn around. This is not your fight." Laughter followed, ugly and confident. Hayes didn't answer with words. Instead, he looked toward his weapons officer and gave a single, sharp nod. The railguns fired. The first slug moved faster than sound could ever travel, tearing through the darkness and slamming into the Raider flagship's front hull. The impact was devastating. The armor cracked open like glass, and a chain of explosions raced down the ship's length. Inside, Raiders were thrown against walls as their ship shuddered. Some tried to run for the escape pods, but the second railgun shot hit before they could even strap in. The flagship split into two burning halves, its pieces drifting apart like glowing embers in the void. The Raiders had underestimated the humans. Now they were panicking. Smaller human frigates shot forward, weaving between the wreckage and locking onto targets with deadly precision. The EFS Hammerfall unleashed a volley of missiles, each one finding the engines of fleeing Raider ships and tearing them apart. Escape wasn't going to happen. "Launch the pods," Hayes ordered. Across the human fleet, drop pods detached from their ships, their metal hulls glowing from the heat of re-entry as they cut through the void toward the enemy vessels. Each pod carried a team of human marines, heavily armed, armored from head to toe, and trained for close-quarters combat. The pods slammed into Raider hulls, drilling their way inside before bursting open. The fighting inside was brutal and fast. The Marines didn't waste time talking. Their rifles spat short, controlled bursts, dropping Raider after Raider. They moved in teams, covering each other, clearing hallways, and sealing off rooms. Raiders tried to hold their ground, but the humans fought like they were born in battle. Meanwhile, on the refugee ships, the scene was completely different. Human medics were boarding, carrying large packs filled with medical gear, water, and emergency food rations. They moved quickly, checking the injured, calming the terrified. One medic wrapped a shivering alien child in a thermal blanket, murmuring softly, "You're safe now." Another gently pulled a wounded father onto a stretcher while his daughter clung to his arm. Lyra sat in a corner, clutching her mother's hand. She watched through the open hatch as two human Marines carried an unconscious alien boy out of the Raider ship and into the safety of a medical bay. Her fear was still there, but now something else had joined it. Wonder. These humans were not just fighting, they were protecting. In space, the battle was shifting heavily in the humans' favor. The Raiders were disorganized, some ships firing wildly, others trying to run. But Hayes didn't let them go. His voice was calm but cold as he spoke into the comms. "Target leadership vessels first. Disable engines. No escape." The The order was followed without hesitation. Human destroyers, fast and agile, darted toward the larger Raider command ships. They fired concentrated bursts at the engines, leaving the Raiders stranded. Once disabled, the ships were swarmed by boarding teams. On one Raider bridge, the captain looked at the human Marines storming in, their weapons aimed steady. He threw up his hands, trying to bargain. But Hayes had been clear. There would be no mercy for leaders who preyed on the helpless. A single shot from a Marine ended the captain's plea. The refugee convoy leader, still aboard his own ship, was watching the battle feed. His jaw was slack, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He had heard of humans before. Some called them reckless, some called them dangerous, but never had he seen a species fight with such ferocity for strangers. Back on Lyra's ship, the tension began to ease. The constant blaring alarms were silenced. The lights stopped flickering. Through the windows, she saw fewer flashes of enemy fire and more of human ships securing the area. But one Raider vessel, larger than the rest, broke away from the battle, its engines burning bright as it tried to escape into the deep void. "They're running," one of the refugee crew whispered. "Not for long." Hayes saw the movement on his tactical display. 3 human destroyers adjusted course instantly, engines roaring as they gave chase. Their formation was perfect. One ship moving high, another low, and the third coming straight on. They were hunting like predators. Lyra pressed her face to the glass, trying to follow the chase. Her mother pulled her back gently, but she didn't want to miss it. The human ships moved faster, closing the gap, weapons locked. The fleeing Raider fired wildly behind him, but every shot missed. The destroyer's return fire was precise and unrelenting. One well-aimed railgun round tore through the Raider's port engine, sending the ship spinning. The second shot crippled its weapons array. The third shot hit the bridge directly, ending the chase in a flash of fire and debris. The humans didn't cheer. They didn't pause to celebrate. They immediately returned to securing the convoy, scanning for any hidden threats. To them, this wasn't glory, it was duty. Lyra sat back, breathing hard, her heart racing as she realized what she had just witnessed. A few hours ago, she believed she would never see another sunrise. Now, because of the humans, there was a chance, not just for her, but for all of them. Somewhere across the fleet, Commander Hayes stood silently, his gaze fixed on the drifting wreckage of the Raider ships. In his mind, the battle wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The Raiders would pay for every life they had taken, and Earthfleet would make sure no one else would suffer at their hands again. The last Raider ship that had managed to break away from the main fight was pushing its engines to the limit. The dark hull of the vessel streaked across the black void, heading for a dense asteroid belt on the edge of the system. Inside, the Raider crew moved frantically, shouting over each other as alarms blared. They thought if they could just make it into the belt, the massive human warships would have trouble following them. In the shadows of the asteroids, they could hide, wait for the humans to leave, and then return to hunt more prey. On the bridge of the EFS Dauntless, Commander Hayes watched their escape path on the tactical screen. His eyes were sharp and calculating. He didn't look hurried. He looked like a predator that already knew how this chase would end. "They're going to the belt," one of his officers reported. Hayes nodded slightly. "Split the intercept teams. Cut them off before they're deep in." Human ships moved instantly. 3 destroyers, Vigilant, Falcon, and Ironwind, broke formation and burned hard toward the fleeing Raider. Their engines flared bright blue, leaving thin trails of energy as they sped across the darkness. The rest of the fleet tightened its defensive circle around the refugee convoy, ensuring no other enemy could slip in. The Raiders entered the asteroid field first, weaving between huge, jagged rocks that turned slowly in the void. Shadows and debris danced across their hull as they tried to vanish deeper inside. For a moment, it looked like they might succeed. But Hayes knew his crews, and he knew their tactics. The Falcon took the high route over the field, its scanners sweeping wide arcs to track every movement. The Vigilant entered the belt at a sharp angle from below, its hull scraping close to the rock surfaces to avoid being detected too early. The Ironwind approached from directly behind, keeping just enough distance to let the Raiders think they were still in control. The asteroid belt itself was dangerous. Massive boulders spinning at unpredictable speeds, clouds of dust and smaller rocks flying between them. Pilots had to be precise. One mistake could tear a ship apart, but human crews didn't slow down. They used the terrain, slipping into the shadows and letting the belt's cover mask their movement. Inside the raider vessel, their captain was starting to sweat. "They shouldn't be this fast," he growled, watching the blips on his scanner get closer. The crew tried to adjust course, diving deeper into the belt, but every turn brought them closer to a trap they didn't realize was being set. The Vigilant was first to make contact. It emerged from behind a massive asteroid directly in the Raiders' path, its forward cannons already charged. The Raiders swerved to avoid a head-on collision, but the move forced them into the firing line of the Falcon, which had been waiting on the far side of the rock. Energy bolts tore across the Raider's port side, disabling one of its smaller thrusters. The Raider captain barked orders to return fire, and bursts of plasma shot back at the humans. The Falcon took a few hits, its shields flaring bright as they absorbed the impact, but the ship held steady. Meanwhile, the Iron Wind closed the gap from behind, cutting off any chance of escape. Hayes' voice came over the comms to all three destroyers. "Do not let them leave the belt. Drive them into the pocket." His tone was even, as if he was calling a maneuver in a training exercise, not a live battle. The humans tightened their positions, forcing the Raider to move in the only open direction, toward a cluster of large asteroids arranged like a wall. What the Raiders didn't realize was that the humans had already calculated the spin and drift of the rocks, creating a narrow kill zone between them. Once inside, the Raider would have almost no room to maneuver. The Vigilant fired again, this time aiming for the enemy's starboard engines. The hit was clean, sending the ship into a slow spin. The crew fought to stabilize it, but their controls were sluggish, damaged from the repeated attacks. As they tried to correct course, the Iron Wind swooped in from behind, unleashing a barrage of railgun rounds. The rounds punched through the rear armor, breaching multiple compartments. Inside, the Raider crew knew it was over. Fires were breaking out in the lower decks, and atmosphere was venting from ruptured hull sections. The captain tried to send a distress call to nearby allies, but human jammers blocked every frequency. Hayes gave the final order. "Finish it." The Falcon lined up its cannons and fired a concentrated burst directly at the Raider's bridge. The shot cut through the armor, tearing apart the control center in a single hit. The enemy ship shuddered, lights flickering out before it went completely dark. For a moment, it drifted silently in the asteroid field, smoke and debris leaking from its wounds. Then, a secondary explosion ripped through the center, splitting the vessel in half. The three human destroyers pulled back, their engines burning softly as they cleared the debris. There was no cheer over the comms, no celebration. The humans treated it like any other mission. Complete the task, move to the next objective. From a safe distance, some of the refugees were watching the chase on their screens. To them, it looked unreal. Three sleek human warships moving like hunters through a maze of stone, cornering a predator and striking with precision. Lyra sat in front of a small display with her mother, her wide eyes reflecting the light of the explosion. She didn't cheer either. She just stared, her small hands clenched around the edge of the seat, realizing that these humans didn't just protect, they made sure the threat could never come back. When the destroyers returned to formation, Hayes simply acknowledged them with a short, "Well done." There was no need for more words. The job was finished, and the path ahead for the convoy was now clear. The asteroid belt, once a place of danger, was left silent again, its spinning rocks hiding nothing but the broken remains of those who thought they could escape Earth's wrath. When the last pieces of the Raider ship's wreckage faded into the darkness, the human fleet began the slow process of cleaning up the battlefield. The EFS Dauntless drifted forward, its floodlights scanning for survivors, not among the enemy leaders. Hayes had made his stance clear, but among any captured or enslaved civilians the Raiders might have been carrying. Small human shuttles darted between twisted hulls, scanning for life signs. Hayes stepped off the command deck and made his way toward one of the carrier bays. He preferred to see the results of the mission with his own eyes, not just through data screens. When the bay doors opened, the noise hit him first. Voices, coughing. the clatter of boots on metal. Refugees were being unloaded from raider prison compartments, some so weak they could barely stand, others holding tightly to the few belongings they had managed to keep. Lyra was among them, standing close to her mother. They had been moved from their own ship into a safer human carrier for medical checks. The air smelled cleaner here, the lights were bright, and the humans moved with purpose. Even so, she couldn't relax. Her father was still gone, taken in the first wave of the raider attack. She searched every face, hoping to see him, but he wasn't there. Hayes noticed her staring. He approached, his tall frame blocking some of the light, and crouched to her level. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "Your father?" She swallowed and looked down. Hayes didn't press further. Instead, he reached into a pouch on his belt and handed her a small ration bar, the wrapper still sealed. "Eat. You'll need your strength." She took it with both hands, whispering a quiet thank you. From there, Hayes moved deeper into the bay, speaking with the refugee convoy leader. The alien's voice trembled as he tried to express his gratitude, but also his confusion. "You risked your lives, your fleet, for us," he said. "We are not your allies. There is no treaty. You had no obligation." Hayes stood still for a moment, his gaze steady. "Once," he said, "humanity was on the ground, broken. We called for help. No one came. We swore we would never let that happen to someone else." His voice was calm, but there was a weight to it, as if those words were carved into him long ago. Elsewhere in the carrier, human medics were treating the worst injuries first. One young alien boy had been beaten badly, his ribs cracked. A human nurse worked gently, scanning for internal damage before applying a biogel that would speed healing. Another alien elder, too frail to walk, was carried on a stretcher to a private cot, where a medic tucked a blanket around her and handed her a cup of warm liquid. None of them were treated as strangers, only as people who had survived something terrible. Lyra wandered to the edge of the bay and looked out through the transparent shield at the battlefield beyond. Wreckage drifted slowly, spinning in the starlight. Human ships moved among it like silent hunters, their searchlights cutting through the dark. Every so often, a bright flash would mark another piece of raider technology being destroyed. Anything that could be used again was being eliminated. On one of the side decks, Hayes called his officers together. "The enemy's command structure here is gone," he said. "But the ones who ordered this raid are still out there. This was not random. It was planned." He pointed to a data projection showing intercepted transmissions from the raiders. The information suggested a larger network, one that preyed on refugee routes regularly. "We will find them," Hayes said, "and when we do, it ends." For the refugees, the hours that followed felt unreal. Instead of being abandoned after the fight, they were fed, given medical attention, and allowed to rest in secured quarters. Lyra and her mother shared a small cabin, its walls plain but warm. A folded blanket, a clean pillow, and even a small light to read by. It felt like a palace after the cold darkness of their damaged ship. She overheard voices in the corridor, human Marines talking quietly. One of them said, "You see that little girl in Bay 3? Looked like she hadn't eaten in days." Another replied, "None of them had. We'll make sure they're fine." The way they spoke, it wasn't pity, it was determination. Later, Hayes returned to the refugee leader. "We'll escort you to a safe port," he said. "But after that, I suggest you don't stay in one place too long until we've cleared the network." The leader nodded, but then surprised Hayes by asking, "Why not join your fleet? Why not let us fight with you?" Hayes considered the question. "Some of you may," he said. "But for now, your people need to recover. The fight will still be there tomorrow. Tonight, you rest." In the mess hall, human crew members made space for the refugees at long metal tables. The food was simple, stew, bread, and thick protein drinks, but it was warm, and no one went without. Lyra sat with her mother, glancing around at the strange faces and uniforms. She noticed that the humans always kept an eye on the doors, the way their hands rested near their belts, even when they were eating. It was a habit of people who expected danger at any moment. After the meal, Hayes walked the corridors alone, stopping at each refugee cabin. Sometimes he spoke only a few words. Sometimes he just listened. In one cabin, a young alien woman gripped his hand tightly, whispering that her brother had been taken months ago. In another, a father bowed his head in silent thanks. Hayes accepted it all without changing his expression, but each story seemed to settle deeper in his mind. When he reached the observation deck, he found Lyra there again, standing at the glass. She looked up at him, her eyes catching the reflection of the drifting wreckage outside. "They can't come back, right?" she asked. Hayes looked out into the darkness for a long moment before answering. Not these ones," he said. "And the others, they will wish they never tried." He left her there, but she felt safer than she had in weeks. Out beyond the glass, the human fleet moved like silent guardians, every ship in formation, every gun ready. For the first time since leaving her home world, Lyra believed there might be a future. And it was because the humans had decided that her people's fight was now their fight too. Word of the battle spread faster than light. By the time the refugee convoy reached the safe port chosen by the humans, distant colonies and outposts were already talking about the destruction of the raider fleet. Traders whispered that Earth fleet had arrived like thunder and crushed the attackers without mercy. But Hayes knew it wasn't over. The raiders they had destroyed were only one arm of a larger network. If left alone, the rest would regroup and strike again, somewhere else, against someone else who couldn't fight back. In the war room aboard the EFS Dauntless, Hayes studied the intercepted transmissions pulled from the wreckage of the raider ships. The fragments of data painted a bigger picture, a sprawling web of hideouts, supply depots, and staging points spread across uncharted systems. Some locations were deep in asteroid fields, others hidden near nebulae to avoid detection. But one name kept appearing, a stronghold called Varthus Reach. It was bigger than any single raider ship, a fortress station where stolen goods were traded, prisoners sold, and new attacks planned. Hayes called his senior officers together. "They'll think the loss of this fleet will slow us down," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "They're wrong. We're going after them." There was no hesitation from the officers. They had seen the condition of the refugees. They had listened to the stories of children taken, families separated, entire colonies stripped bare. Every human in that room understood the mission wasn't just retaliation, it was prevention. Preparations began immediately. Across the human fleet, engineers checked weapons, resupplied ammunition, and inspected every inch of the ships. Supply carriers took on extra food and fuel for what could be a long campaign. Fighter squadrons ran practice drills, their ships darting between larger vessels like a swarm of silver wasps. The refugees had been told they could stay behind, safe in the port city. But when Hayes made the announcement of the next mission, a group of volunteers stepped forward. They weren't soldiers, but they knew the raiders' routes, their hiding spots, and the tricks they used to avoid patrols. One alien navigator named Sarek approached Hayes personally. "I've been through Varthus Reach," he said, his voice low. "I escaped once. I can guide you in, avoid the traps." Hayes studied the man for a moment, then nodded. "You'll ride with my ship." Not all volunteers offered maps or tactics. Some simply brought determination. Mechanics who had once worked on freighters asked to help in the engine rooms. Medics who had treated their own people during the raid offered to join the human medical teams. The willingness to help, even after everything they'd been through, was something the human crew respected deeply. One evening, as the fleet prepared to depart, Lyra and her mother visited the docking bay. Her mother held a small wrapped package. Inside was a hand-drawn star chart, carefully marked with safe routes and known raider ambush points, knowledge passed down from her own parents who had been traders before the war. She handed it to Hayes. "This is all we have to give," she said. "Use it to keep others from living what we've lived." Hayes accepted the gift without ceremony, but there was a faint shift in his expression, something between gratitude and determination. "It will help," he said simply. The day of departure came. The fleet assembled in high orbit above the port world, their formation tight and disciplined. From the ground, they looked like a chain of bright silver lights stretching across the sky. In the command center of the Dauntless, Hayes stood at the front of the bridge as the final system checks came in. Engines were primed, weapons loaded, shields at full capacity. The departure signal was given. Engines roared to life, and one by one, the ships slipped into hyperspace, their forms stretching and vanishing into streaks of light. The hum of the drives filled the air, a deep vibration felt in the bones more than heard. During the journey, Hayes called the crew together in the main assembly hall of the flagship. Farthest Reach is not a single ship, he reminded them. It's a fortress. They'll have fighters, gun batteries, and enough stolen tech to make them dangerous. But they've made one mistake. They think we're coming to negotiate. His voice dropped into a tone that carried through every corner of the hall. We're not. We're coming to end them. The crew responded with a steady, determined silence, the kind that didn't need cheers to show resolve. Every person there knew what was at stake. As the fleet drew closer to their target, scouts were sent ahead. Small, stealth-equipped corvettes slid into the outer edges of Varthus Reach's defense perimeter. They gathered images and scans, feeding them back to the Dauntless. The data showed a sprawling structure built into the side of a massive asteroid, its surface bristling with turrets and shield generators. Docked ships came and went constantly, trading vessels, pirate skiffs, and heavily armed raider cruisers. The sight only hardened Hayes' plan. We hit fast, he told his captains over the secure comms. First wave takes out the outer defenses. Second wave pushes into the dockyards. No time for them to organize. In the refugee quarters aboard one of the carriers, Lyra overheard some of the human crew talking about the coming battle. One Marine was cleaning his rifle, checking the scope. You ever seen a fortress run scared? He asked his squad mate. We're about to make that happen. She didn't fully understand the tactics, but she understood the feeling in their voices. They weren't afraid. They were ready. The final hours before arrival were tense. The fleet moved in silence, hyperspace corridors flickering around them. Hayes stood at the forward observation deck, hands clasped behind his back, watching the faint streaks of light. He didn't speak to anyone in those moments. He was thinking about the prisoners they might find, the traps they would face, and the message they needed to send. When the alert came that Varthus Reach was less than 1 hour away, the mood across the fleet shifted. Marines secured their armor. Pilots strapped into their cockpits. Engineers gave final reports on shield integrity. The air inside every ship seemed heavier, charged with the knowledge that when they dropped out of hyperspace, there would be no turning back. For the refugees who had chosen to stay aboard, it was a strange mix of fear and pride. They knew the danger, but they also knew this fight could prevent others from suffering as they had. In one of the narrow corridors, Lyra walked beside her mother, feeling the hum of the engines under her feet. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew that the humans were going to face the same monsters who had taken her father. And this time, they wouldn't be running. They would be the ones bringing the fight. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace just beyond the edge of the asteroid field where Varthus Reach was hidden. The giant rock spun slowly, its shadow cutting across space like a black blade. Built into its side was the fortress station. Metal towers, landing docks, and weapons arrays glowing faintly in the dim light. The place looked alive with movement. Raider ships of all sizes drifted in and out of the massive docking bays, their hulls painted with the same red markings seen in the earlier battle. On the bridge of the EFS Dauntless, the air was silent, except for the beeping of sensors. Hayes stood in the center, eyes locked on the massive fortress displayed on the tactical screen. They're not expecting us this soon, he said. Let's keep it that way for as long as we can. First wave, prepare to engage defenses. The order rippled through the fleet. The first wave was made up of heavy cruisers and missile destroyers, their launch tubes already primed. Engines roared softly as they adjusted into attack formation. The moment they were in position, the space between the two forces lit up with fire. Dozens of missiles streaked toward Varthus Reach, each one guided by precision targeting systems. The first explosions tore through the outer defense grid. Gun towers shattered, their wreckage spinning into space. Some of the fortress's cannons fired back, but the human ships kept moving, never staying in one spot long enough to be hit. Fighter squadrons launched from the carriers, their sleek frames darting between asteroids and enemy fire. They weaved through the chaos like hunters in a pack, targeting weak points in the station's shields. Inside Varthus Reach, alarms blared. Raiders scrambled to their ships, engines flaring as they rushed to meet the attackers. But the humans were already in the middle of them. The second wave came in hard, frigates and boarding craft that shot directly for the docking bays. Railgun rounds tore through enemy hulls, leaving burning holes in their sides. Hayes' voice came through the comms, steady and controlled. Boarding teams, proceed. Secure all prisoner holds. Command deck is priority. In one of the boarding craft, human Marines checked their weapons as the docking clamps on the fortress loomed larger in the viewport. The moment the craft latched on, the door blew open and they poured inside, moving in tight formation. Gunfire echoed through the metal corridors. Raiders fought back, but the humans advanced steadily, covering each other and clearing each section. In the main docking bay, the fight was chaos. Raiders tried to take off, but human fighters strafed the deck, disabling engines before the ships could lift clear. Marines pushed forward, forcing the enemy back toward the inner corridors. Smoke from small fires curled upward, the air thick with the scent of burning metal and fuel. Hayes wasn't just watching, he was part of the assault. Leading a squad through one of the upper access routes, he moved with a rifle in hand, each step calculated. His squad reached a bulkhead sealed with heavy locks. A breaching charge was planted, the blast shaking the corridor as the door blew inward. Inside was the fortress's command center. The raider leader, a tall figure with scarred armor, turned sharply at the sound. His eyes narrowed as he saw humans in his command room. "You don't belong here," he growled. Hayes answered with a single pull of the trigger. The leader fell before he could even raise his weapon. Back outside, the battle was turning completely in Earthfleet's favor. The fortress's shield generators were destroyed, leaving its walls exposed to missile fire. The human cruisers rained precision strikes along the structure's weakest points, causing sections to collapse into themselves. On one of the lower decks, a Marine squad located a massive prisoner bay. Cells lined the walls, each one holding frightened captives, aliens from dozens of species. When the Marines cut the locks, the prisoners hesitated at first, unsure if this was another trick. But once they saw the human insignia on the soldier's armor, hope sparked in their eyes. They were guided quickly toward evacuation points, many too weak to walk without help. Lyra, watching the battle feed from a safe human carrier, clung to her mother's side. She had never seen a fight like this. The humans weren't just winning, they were dismantling the fortress piece by piece. She saw one camera feed showing Hayes standing over the fallen raider leader, his squad securing the control room. Another showed prisoners flooding into evacuation shuttles, their chains left behind on the deck. Back in the fortress, Hayes' voice came over the fleet-wide channel. "Control is ours. Begin sweep. Clear every level." His tone was still calm, but there was no mistaking the finality in it. This was the end of Varthus Reach. The sweep was fast and methodical. Any remaining resistance was crushed within minutes. The humans didn't stop to loot or take trophies. They disabled every remaining weapon, destroyed any stored raider ships, and pulled all prisoners to safety. Then, charges were planted along the station's structural supports. One by one, the human squads withdrew to their ships. From the safety of the fleet, the refugees and crew watched as Varthus Reach's outer walls began to bulge outward. The explosions started deep inside, rippling through the structure until it came apart entirely. Massive chunks of metal spun into the void, glowing red from the heat of the blasts. The fortress that had once been the heart of the raider network was gone. As the debris field settled, the human fleet regrouped, forming a protective ring around the evacuation ships carrying the rescued prisoners. Not a single hostile signal showed on the sensors. The system was silent. On the bridge of the Dauntless, Hayes looked at the tactical map one last time before giving the order to pull back. Mission complete. Set course for the refugee colony. His officers moved quickly to follow the command. For the people they had saved, this was more than just a victory. It was the end of a nightmare. For the humans, it was another promise kept. The helpless had been defended, and those who preyed on them had been shown no mercy. From her place aboard the carrier, Lyra pressed her face to the window as the fleet turned for home. She knew the humans would leave the system soon, but their presence had changed everything. The raiders had thought themselves untouchable. Now, all that was left of their stronghold was dust drifting in the black. The human fleet moved in perfect formation as it escorted the refugee ships away from the ruins of Varthus Reach. The stars stretched around them in the quiet after the storm. The battle was over, but the work was not. Every ship in the convoy carried people who had lost homes, families, and a sense of safety. The humans knew that winning the fight was only part of the mission. Making sure these people had a future was the rest. A new world had been chosen. It was small, green, and rich with water, orbiting a calm yellow sun on the edge of charted space. The humans called it Haven's Rest. For the refugees, it was a chance to stop running. When the fleet arrived in orbit, the view was breathtaking. Blue oceans, white clouds, and land covered in deep green forests. The sight alone brought tears to many eyes. Some had not seen a planet like this in years. Hayes stood on the bridge of the Dauntless, looking down at the world through the wide observation windows. He watched the first shuttles break away from the convoy and descend into the atmosphere. On the surface, human engineers had already landed days earlier to prepare basic shelters, water purification systems, and power supplies. It wasn't much yet, but it was a start. Lyra sat by the window of her shuttle, her hands pressed against the glass as the clouds parted to reveal rolling hills and a winding silver river below. She leaned closer to her mother and whispered, "It's beautiful." Her mother nodded but didn't speak. Her voice was caught in her throat. When the refugees stepped onto the surface, the air felt fresh and clean. Human soldiers helped unload supplies while medics guided the sick to temporary clinics. Children ran across the grass, laughing for the first time in months. People walked without looking over their shoulders, without waiting for the sound of engines that meant danger. Hayes moved among them, speaking to the colony planners and checking on the refugees. He didn't stay in one place for long, but everywhere he went, people turned to watch him. To them, he was the man who had brought the storm that destroyed their enemies, the one who had turned the tide when they thought there was no hope left. That evening, a gathering was held in the open field near the landing site. The refugee leader stepped forward to address everyone. His voice was steady, but heavy with emotion. "When they came for us, we had nothing. No ships strong enough to fight. No allies willing to stand with us. We were ready to be erased. But the humans came. They fought for us, bled for us, and stood between us and death. We owe them more than we can ever repay." He turned toward Hayes, raising his voice so it carried to everyone present. "We name this world Haven's Rest, in honor of those who gave us the chance to rest without fear. And we swear that if Earth ever calls, we will answer." There was a quiet murmur of agreement from the crowd, a sound like the beginning of something larger. Lyra stepped forward shyly, holding something in her hands. It was a small pendant she had carved from a smooth piece of local stone. On its surface, she had scratched the rough outline of the Earth Fleet's crest. She held it out to Hayes. "So you remember us," she said softly. Hayes looked at the small gift for a long moment before taking it. His large hand closed gently around it. "I won't forget," he told her. His voice was low, but certain. The next morning, the human fleet prepared to leave. Ships lifted slowly from the colony fields, engines humming as they climbed back toward the black sky. On the ground, the refugees gathered to watch. Some waved, others stood silently, their eyes following the ships until they were specks of light. On the bridge of the Dauntless, Hayes gave the order to form up. The fleet's course was already plotted toward another sector where reports of pirate activity had surfaced. This mission was done, but there would always be others. He turned to his crew, his voice carrying through the comm system to every ship. "Where the helpless call, we will answer. Where the guilty hide, we will find them. That is the oath of the Earth Fleet." The words were simple, but they burned into the memory of everyone who heard them. As the fleet broke orbit, Lyra and her mother stood on the colony's highest ridge, watching the sky. The ships rose like silver arrows, then stretched into lines of light as they vanished into hyperspace. Lyra clutched the empty chain around her neck, knowing her pendant was with Hayes now, somewhere out there among the stars. The humans were gone, but their presence lingered in the safety of the colony, in the stories that would be told around every fire, and in the knowledge that someone out there was willing to fight for the helpless without asking for anything in return. For the first time in a long time, the night on Haven's Rest was peaceful. No alarms, no sudden evacuations, no fear. Only the quiet hum of the new settlement and the steady rhythm of waves against the shore. and far away beyond the reach of the colony's sky, the Earth fleet moved on, ready for the next cry for help.